Peace and love, freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad, and those in the future. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on streets. This revolution is not about burning cars. This revolution is about building our own cars, selling them to make our own money. Essentially, this revolution is in the mind, because if we are not in charge of our mind, if we are not in charge of our thoughts and our reality, then the oppressor will control our mind and make us the tools to oppress ourselves and to oppress our people. Freedom and decolonization to all African people. Once again, it is a pleasure to have you on our weekly rendezvous where we talk about issues related to the African future and African liberation. My name is King Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party. Happy to meet with you here today again. So today I want to tackle a small topic, but very important because it's becoming a trend within Pan-Africanism, or among those who call themselves Pan-Africanist. We realize these new trends where people do advocate for us to forget about the history. Most of people who now come as Pan-Africanists do advocate to neglect the history. They want the masses of African people to not think about the history, to think not about the past, but to focus on the future, which is a good thing indeed. For them, the history's got a lot of negative things. History cannot help us to move forward. What we need to do now is just to focus on the future and build a better world. And I understand their desire, because sometimes we find ourselves in that space or that reality whereby you are surrounded by certain people, for instance, European people or Asian people. Then you begin to feel uncomfortable to talk about your history as African people. Then you are kind of compelled to only focus on what you can do together with other people or other race to build a unified world, a world of peace, a world of humanity, a world where we all live together as brothers and sisters. It's a very good opinion, a very good ideal, ideal and a vision of the world. But realistically speaking, when you come into reality, then you begin to face a different situation that eventually compels you as well to go back, to look in the past and to understand something. And the reason I'm saying this is because what Africa needs today is reparation more than development. This reparation, we call it, in other words, liberation, more than development, more than modernization. When I talk about reparation, it means that the African man and African woman himself need to be repaid in his mind, need to be fixed in his mind, right? It needs to be brought back on the center of his campus as a human being, as an African person. And this is what needs to happen now before anything that we want as a modernization, as a development, as industrialization can take place and be productive in our lives as African people. And we cannot achieve this task of reparation, this task of fixing the African man or an African woman through forgetting, or by forgetting the history, by forgetting the past, by closing our eyes on the past and focusing only on the future, or on what we can do with other people to build the future. We cannot do that. And I'm going to use an analogy of lost key for you to understand what I am trying to emphasize here. You see, if you walk on streets at night where there's no light. Let's say you are walking down the street at night and there's no light, and you lost your key while you are walking. But as you lift your eyes in front of you, you see there's a light there. In reality, you cannot go under the lights to begin looking for your key there, because you did not lose your key where there was light. You lost your key in the dark, right? So what you need to do is to go back where it's dark to look for the key, because that's where you lost your key. You cannot go in the lights to look for the key there, because you did not lose your key in the lights. You lost it in the dark. If you are smart enough, what you can do maybe is to go and find a light and bring it to a place, to a darker place where you lost your key in order to find it. But you cannot go in the lights or someplace else where there's a light to go and look for the key that you lost in the place where it was dark. So I think we can agree, all of us, on this analogy. And then let's now then try to put it in the context of African reality. You see, we lost the essence of our life, of our identity in the past, not in the present, not in the lack of industrialization. In other words, I'm trying to say that we did not become what we are today. We were not defeated due to lack of industrialization, due to lack of modernization, due to lack of, development whatsoever that you can call it. We lost it in the past, right? In a moment where we were darkened by the forces of imperialism, so that we don't see the reality, or we didn't see the intention, right? So we did not lose our freedom due to lack of modernization, industrialization, all these things. We lost it in the past. So our duty today, in order to repair ourselves, in order to fix and rebuild ourselves as African people, we need to go in the past and examine our history and understand how we lost the key to our freedom, how we lost the key to our liberation, how we became subject to other people's power, dominion, and imperialism, so to say. And that is the only way we will be able to then adjust or to address whatever that we lost during that time, and then liberate ourselves today. You see, we did not lose our freedom, as I said again, due to lack of technology or all these things that we are longing for now. Because when we look today in the world, among those who pretend or those who talk or advocate about us to forget the history, you will see that they are more focused into industrialization of Africa, technology, artificial intelligence as the only solution that will liberate Africa. I believe that technology is a part of it. I believe that industrialization is part of it. But the bottom line is that we need to find ourselves first, where we lost ourselves in the past, before we can productively and effectively use technologies, because technologies are just tools. But the problem is the essence of our identity as African person or African people is what we have lost, and we lost it in the past. That's why it is important to go back in the past, to examine our past, and to fix what need to be fixed in terms of what happened to us or what we went through in the past, so that technology can be productive to us. And I'm always thinking this, maybe some of you can agree with me on this, that today, you see, China is industrialized country, is modernized. You have technology in China, you have a lot of things there. We can decide today to swap between us and Chinese. Means you take all African people out of the continent, you bring them to China, which is already industrialized, which is already modernized, and you take all the Chinese people, you bring them to Africa, then give each other like 10 years down the line. In 10 years, what you will see most probably or most likely what you're going to see, or what's going to happen, is that Chinese will be able to transform Africa and turn it into another China. It means developed, modernized, a super modernized actually. And the Africans will be turning China into another Africa. It means into another failed state, another, third world jungle, and all the things that we know that we are facing in Africa on a daily basis due to the mismanagement of ourselves and our resources, right? That contributes to the efforts of imperialism to undermine African efforts of liberation and emancipation. So you see, this is what I'm saying. So the problem is not really the technological problem. The problem is not really the industrialization problem. The problem is we as African people have lost something, the essence of our identity, right? Now, you may be thinking that the example that I've given of China, it's just a hypothetical thing, which is not linked to reality. Now, I can give you another example which is now linked to the reality. Most of African countries after the independence inherited certain basic infrastructures in Africa, such as roads, hospitals, and so that were built by the colonizers during the time of colonization. Now, when you go in Africa today, when you go to Congo, when you go to Nigeria, when you go to many places, you will see that Africans have not been able to build new infrastructures. Those who are a bit clever, they've been maintaining only the old infrastructures of the colonial era. They have not been able to build new things, to develop new things in Africa, new towns, new cities, new infrastructures and stuff like that. They are still using the old things that were left by colonizers. And those who are not clever, like in the Congo, mostly you'll find that those old infrastructures inherited from colonialism are in decay, total decay, are destroyed. And there's no new solutions. There's no new solutions except new promises that every leader comes and promises to people or gives to people. So already this tells you that we had already inherited something, and the reality today is that we have even destroyed what we have inherited. We have been not able to properly manage even those few things that we received from the colonizers. Many South Africans today are blaming the ruling party, ANC. Why? Because they can observe the destruction that South Africa is going through right now. The economy is in decay. Everything is just kind of upside down, and people are already tired of the ruling party. They want to find an alternative. Why? It's simply because we did not manage to build on what we have received, even though the South African case might be different, can be explained differently. There are a lot of reasons to that, but the bottom line is this: we did not lose the key to our freedom or to our liberation due to lack of technology, infrastructure, modernization, all these nonsensical terms that are being bombarded on us every day. We lost our freedom by losing our identity as African people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if I can try to maybe just give one point that is coming to my mind now as to how we really have lost ourselves. You see, when you talk today about the Congo, about Nigeria, about Ghana, Burkina Faso, you have to trace the history of these countries from a certain time, from probably 1885 at the Berlin Conference, where European countries gathered to decide on how to share or to divide among themselves Africa. That's where you have these countries. That's where you have the creation of these countries that we have today. So before that, we were Africans. That's our identity, and that is our history. We had a long history before the 1884, 1885. Now, every time I call myself, I am Congolese, I am Nigerian, I am Angolans, I need to trace my history starting from 1885. It means I claim my history to be that of 1885 because that is when Congo, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, all these countries began to exist. And at the same time, I am denying the long-time history of glory, of prosperity that I've heard, that my ancestors had before the white man could walk out of his cave, wore shoes, and lived in a house that had a window. We had a history, we had kingdoms, we had royalties in Africa. So I do deny, I do brush out all that history, and I claim the only history, the history that the colonialists gave me since the 1884, 1885. Now, remember, every time people define you, people give you an identity, they also automatically have power over you. This is a spiritual thing. For the fact that these people sat down in their council and began to decide over the fate of Africa and redefined us and designated us into what we are today, what we are happily embracing, ready to die for Congo, for Nigeria, for Burkina Faso, for all these things that were created by the oppressors. We embrace these things, we still then giving them the power to rule over us and to dominate us. And for me, if I have to trace one of the causes of mischiefs, of sufferings, of the predicament of Africa today, I trace it back from that time. So for me, I need to go back in the past and to undo the 1884 and to reclaim my Africanity, to reclaim my identity as African person, and to consider all these countries as colonial enclosures in which we have been put so that we can be properly managed, controlled, dominated, and afterward oppressed by the colonialists who control today the industry of neocolonialism. So you see, that's how I think about it. That's how I think about it. And as a revolutionary, the first thing that I want to do as part of my revolution is to rebel myself against that colonial structure, that colonial order, that colonial definition of myself, and then to begin redefining myself in a way that links me, the way that connects me with my great ancestors who built pyramids, who created civilizations, who did great things, because in my blood flows the genes of those people, right? So this is why it is important that we need to go back and see the damage that we're done on us as African people and repair the damage today before we can move forward. Because whether you like it or not, the past, your past is inextricably linked to your present, the same way that your present is linked to the future. You cannot separate them in any how. And for us to repair ourselves today, we need to understand, to analyze properly the scientific job that was done to destroy us, or the spiritual job that was done to destroy our mind today. You see, when you go to all these so-called industrialized countries, developed countries, you will find a service that is called psychiatrist. You have a lot of psychiatrists in those countries, or psychologists in those countries. The reason why they are there is because they have to assess the mental health of their countries. And in reality, there are a lot of people in Europe who are sick mentally, even though you can see them dressing properly, going to work, but they are not right up here. That's why you have those services to assess the state of health, mental health of a nation. And when you come to Africa, you don't have most of these services. We don't have them. Many of them, in most cases, we don't have services such as psychiatrists, psychologists. We don't have them in most of countries in Africa. Can you imagine the state of mental health of African people, and including those in power? Sometimes we wonder why we have so much wealth, but we suffer. But we put sick people into power. You know, the reason why we don't know they are sick doesn't mean that they are not sick. It's simply because we don't have services that can really assess the mental health of our nations to tell us how many mentally disabled people we have in our countries, so that we can help them, we can assist them to bring them back to, to where they are supposed to be and functioning as a human beings. This is to say that we need to really trace the damage of colonialism, neo-colonialism in the minds of African person today. And if we do that work, we'll find that the majority of us are really sick in the mind, are disabled mentally. They are not really capable or fit to rule our nations or to be given any responsibility in our countries. And that's a reality. And we will have to assist them, to repair them, to restore them mentally in order for them to become fit to rule our countries again. So it is very important that we need to understand that today we are looking for technologies, we are looking for AI to change the situation of Africa. But I believe that these tools cannot really fundamentally change the reality of African people until the inner part of African person, the inner self of us as a people, has been restored, has been rebuilt, has been repaired. And the damage of neo-colonialism, of slavery has been destroyed in us. You see, one of the greatest Pan-Africanists of our time, Dr. Umar Johnson, used to say that you can take a slave out of slavery, but it is up to a slave to take slavery out of himself. So the work that was done was to induce in us the slave mentality. And that is what we need to take out of ourselves by ourselves in our own initiative. Even though we have been declared independent, even though we have been declared free, since 1960s or somewhere around there, it is our duty today. It was always our duty, and it remains our duty to assess ourselves, to examine ourselves, and to kick slavery or slave mindset out of us so that we can find ourselves again in the right or on the right spots to be fully functioning as African people and eventually glorify our ancestors who did great things in this world. Because today we are not glorifying them. We are ashamed to our ancestors. In our generation today, mostly we are ashamed, right? To Sankara, to Lumumba, we are ashamed. To Kwame Nkrumah, to Marcus Garvey, we are ashamed to all these ancestors who really did great things. We are ashamed to Imhotep, Ptahhotep, to all our great ancestors. So it is your responsibility, my responsibility, to resurrect ourselves again before we can then begin to use technologies as the tools to emancipate ourselves. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is, seek ye first our liberation as African people, mental liberation. Then development and technologies will make sense in our lives. Otherwise, there will be just things that will oppress us even more and steal the future of our children. Thank you very much for your time and your dedication. We invite you to join us in the ACUP, African Continental Unity Party, and in our Pan-African Academy that we call the Free-Minded Academy, where we try our best to restore the African men and African women so that we can become fit again to lead our nations out of the 21st century successfully and make Africa the global power base before the end of this 21st century. So if you have one shoes, please, if you have one trouser, please sell it and buy a sword. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is time for revolution, and this revolution is no longer on streets. This revolution is in the mind, because if we are not in charge of our mind, our bodies will be simply the tools that the oppressor will be using to oppress us and to oppress our people. Freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad, and those in the future. See you next time.